people refer to Donald Trump and his followers as a cult leader and cult followers. And Dr. Stephen Hassan has a new update to his book, The Cult of Trump. A leading expert explains how the president uses mind control. It's with a foreword by George Conway. It's updated with new material. Dr. Hassan is a licensed mental health professional, a cult expert, the author of several books, including The Cult of Trump, founding director of Freedom of Mind Resource Center. And he actually was in the moon cult and has been deprogrammed himself, and now teaches at the Harvard Medical School and directs the Freedom of Mind Resource Center outside of Boston, and helps deprogram other people. Dr. Hassan, welcome back to the program. So let's start with the premise, cult leader and cult. What are your definitions, and how does Trump meet this criteria?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back, Tom. So first of all, Erich Fromm created the definition of the stereotypical profile of cult leaders, modeling off of Adolf Hitler. He called it malignant narcissism. So in chapter 3 of The Cult of Trump, I compare Trump with Jim Jones, my former cult leader, Sun Myung Moon, and Hubbard of Scientology. So those characteristics are classic. But then what I realized when I researched the book was that there are actual authoritarian cults that comprise a large majority of the cult of Trump. My former cult is in this group, a group called The Family, Opus Dei, but the biggest network is called New Apostolic Reformation mega churches. There's some 30 million Americans, 40 million Americans in these groups. And how they're different from legitimate Christian churches is that they have prophets, self-proclaimed prophets or apostles who claim to speak to God, and they cast out demons supposedly and do faith healings. And it's these people who say God told them Trump won the 2020 election, so don't believe the satanic media. So this is a religious cult phenomenon that is largely Trump's base. I added the afterword. George Conway kindly gave the forward, and I have a tremendous amount of material on my Substack in the years since the book initially came out in 2019.
So the definition of a cult, I mean, the Trump cult is not all about, he's a prophet who speaks on behalf of God. In fact, his followers call him, the King Cyrus, the ungodly man who helps save the godly people.
Yeah, my apologies for not answering directly your question. My definition of an authoritarian cult is a pyramid structured group that uses deceptive recruitment and controls people's behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make true believer identities. It's actually a dissociative disorder, speaking in mental health terms, that's dependent and obedient. So as my identity was hacked when I got recruited and radicalized in the Moonies, and my family helped to deprogram me after a near-fatal van crash, people who are in the cult of Trump can exit. They have doubts, but we need to change our messaging to one that is going to get through the programming and the phobia indoctrination and the thought stopping that the cult identity has. And that's why part of my messaging is we need to be reaching out to these folks, not putting them down, calling them names, but interacting respectfully, reminding them of who they were before they got radicalized, and asking questions in a curious, responsible way.
I get that. It
does work.
I get that. So what are the strategies, the techniques? There were several words you used there. I'm not recalling all of them. That Trump is using to get people into his cult, and which of those do we need to blow up, and how can you I don't know if racism is one of them, but that certainly is a huge aspect to the Trump follower phenomenon.
Yeah, so identity attacks and making an us versus them, good versus evil, simplistic framing is a standard of cult leaders of we're the righteous, we're the chosen, everyone else is satanic and is a pedophile, etc. As I mentioned in the book in detail, actually, Trump uses hypnotic methodology. I was trained in something called NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, and Trump uses this manipulation to elicit emotions and to repeat over and over again lies, and the brain starts acting as if it's true if that's the only source of information a person is getting. Trump projects his own bad behavior onto his opponents, so he misdirects people's attention. But the critical thing is, if people would just unplug for a week or two and interact with family and friends and do activities they used to do before they got radicalized, a lot of their neurons will come back online. And the critical thing is, don't attack Trump directly, the doctrine, the policy directly, because that elicits the cult identity's defense systems. The best thing is to talk about Chinese communist brainwashing techniques, and also about pimps and traffickers and how they groom and recruit and indoctrinate people. And then ask people questions. Tell me more. Tell me how you make sense of this. Tell me if you would reconsider an involvement and what criteria you might use to reconsider. And often a cult member will say, oh, no, I'm happy. I will never reconsider. And then you can ask hypothetical questions. What if you determine you're a religious person and you pray and you determine that Jesus doesn't want Trump to be elected? Would you follow what God wants for you and your conscience, or would you continue to do what everyone in your circle is doing? And the thing is, don't try to persuade them. Ask them questions that make them self-reflect, because people will exit themselves if it's done properly.
One of the things that I've noticed is that in addition to religious cults, we have secular cults. I think the cult around Bob Kennedy and his rants about Anthony Fauci and mRNA vaccines and masks and things could arguably be called a secular cult. There's QAnon, which is kind of a merger of the two, and then Trump has this political cult. To what extent do we need to segment these and have different approaches, or do they all have far more commonalities than differences?
Well, you make a very important point, and that is that what's going to be effective is to customize for each person based on their background and their orientation. So if someone is brought in through anti-vax conspiracy stuff, and by the way, I did do a whole bite model analysis of QAnon as a mind control cult and a psyop. But the point is based on how the person got recruited in is going to dictate for me as an expert who's hired to advise family and friends on how to approach people. You want to create an approach that's going to work for that individual person. So I'm telling you, Chinese communist brainwashing, that's what helped me get out of the Moonies, was learning Robert J. Lifton's 8 criteria from 1961. And I believed I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed, but we went through all 8 criteria and it fit the Moonies, and I was confused. And that led to me realizing the next day that Moon was a liar. And if he was a liar, that meant he couldn't be the Messiah and a man of God. And that meant he wasn't trustworthy. So once my critical thinking came back online and I could reason, I believe in a God of truth, but he's a liar. the dominoes fell in my head, and I was like, what have I been believing for the last 2.5 years?
Yeah, makes perfect sense, and I think it's probably good guidance for a lot of people who are listening right now. Dr.
Have
Stephen,
hope. People are going to leave. People are leaving MAGA.
there you go. Dr. Stephen Hassan, The Cult of Trump, a new update to the book. Check it out. Dr. Hassan, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom.
Always great talking with you. We'll be back at 16 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls, actually a geeky science in your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.